Hey, everybody, and happy 2023 to everyone, and welcome to this year's first episode of Career Club Live. I'm Bob Goodwin, the president of Career Club, and thank you again for joining us. If you're here joining us live, please ask questions, make comments. You're welcome to do that. If you're listening to this on the podcast later on, or you can also watch this on YouTube. So however it is that you consume this, we're glad that you're here. If you are not familiar with Career Club, we are using proven sales and marketing methods to help people find careers that matter to them. We're especially pleased to have announced recently the launch of Next Placement, which is our answer to outplacement. So for companies that have gone through downsizings or right sizings or whatever, and want to take a more human approach to helping the affected employees move on in their career successfully, please check out Next Placement. So with that, I would love to welcome our guest today, Joel Rubinson. I'm going to need to read this because Joel's credentials are ridiculous. So Joel Rubinson is the president of Rubinson Partners, Inc. Joel is the former chief research officer for the ARF, the Advertising Research Foundation, and is a member of the faculty of NYU Stern School of Business. He currently serves as the Multi-Touch Attribution expert for the Mobile Marketing Association and is a global thought leader on new product innovation, advertising effectiveness, and targeting. And Joel, I only said about half of what your credentials are, but welcome. It's so great to have you.
Thanks, Bob. The rest of it will come out in your interview, I'm sure. So
no, it's all good. So as is our tradition, let's give people just a little bit of an opportunity to get to know you better. So where were you? We have 5 icebreaker questions we love to ask people. Okay. So we'll start with the easy one. Where were you born and raised?
Brooklyn.
And where are you calling in from today?
Long Island.
So you haven't left. So, and then where did you go to school?
NYU undergrad, University of Chicago graduate school.
See, I'm showing off
I went to University of Chicago because I wanted to study under, people like Milton Friedman and George Stigler. And so I did get the opportunity to do that. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, like I said, I'm showing off my Tennessee degree, so I don't mean to kind of out ace you on the education bit. Tell us a little bit about your family.
Well, from a business point of view, my older daughter is kind of like the head of performance marketing for MAC Cosmetics.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, she followed in my footsteps, starting in marketing research, actually at NPD, where I worked for 25 years, and then then found her own career path into Estee Lauder, and specifically the MAC division.
Well,
that's Sarah. My daughter, Sarah.
And how many kids do you guys have?
2.
2, yeah. And well, she definitely got the analytical gene, it sounds like. Now, you mentioned NPD.
Got the marketing gene for sure, yeah.
And I said ARF earlier. Do you mind giving folks just a little bit of your career arc?
Yeah, I mean, my first real job in marketing or marketing research was Unilever. Back then it was called Lever Brothers. Yeah. It was in the US it was called Lever Brothers, but it's Unilever. And I became kind of like the head of analytics when I was about 28. And then I left, went to the NPD group, and was at the NPD group for I see.
Hey, Susan.
Old colleague, yeah. I don't mean she's old. I just mean we worked together at NPD. I'm old though, but anyway. So I was at NPD for 25 years, and you just gotta, boats aren't made for safe harbors. You got to eventually leave the mothership and do some different stuff. So I went to a branding consultancy. I worked at Synovate before Ipsos bought them, ARF, and I've been in my own consulting business since 2010.
Yeah, wow. And then we're seasoned. That's a good word. Well tenured. Now, I think I know the answer to this next question, but what are hobbies or passions that you might have outside of work?
Well, passion, big Yankee fan.
That's
I mean, I love baseball in general, and I love the stats of baseball. I've always been into it ever since I was in high school, and wrote a paper in college, in grad school, in stats that was actually basically it was like a Bill James Moneyball thing before Bill James. I just didn't know you could make money at it. So,
Well,
anyways, I didn't pursue that as an idea. I just thought it was a fun thing to do. But baseball, and then I've been in a band since, well, continuously since 1996. But with blues and country and rock. But before that, I was actually in a bluegrass band. My first band was a bluegrass band. Yeah, I love
well,
bluegrass.
I knew you were going to say Yankees. I didn't know anything about the music stuff.
Oh,
So,
okay, yeah.
couple quick.
I played until COVID hit. I was the harmonica player in a Rolling Stones tribute band for since 2003. So whatever, 17, 18 years. Yeah.
Okay, so a couple quick questions. Who's your favorite musician?
I would say right now, Chris Stapleton.
Okay, and who's your favorite Yankee all time?
Mickey Mantle.
Yeah.
Come on, you kidding?
Awesome. All right. Well, we successfully navigated the icebreaker, and that was cool. And like I said, I even learned something. So, I am. We're going to get our geek on here a little bit, which will be fun.
Okay. Yeah, good.
Here's some more NPD friends and people that I think we both have known for a bit online. So thank you. Hey, Barry. And there's one that says LinkedIn user, so I'm not sure who that was. But in all seriousness, Joel, I'm a huge fan of your work. And we'll get to this at the very end, but your blog is like a textbook in marketing for me. I think the quality of material that you put out there is just amazing. And I'm like, well, if I'm at least kind of keeping up with what Joel is saying state of the art is, I can't be that far off. So I just love the work that you do. One of the things I really admire and respect about your body of work is that it's all data-based. These are findings, not theories. And so you let the data take you to where the answer lies rather than having a preconceived idea and then forcing the data to support
well, it's definitely not a soft approach to marketing that I mean, I've gravitated, because everybody has their opinions about, brand positioning and whatever. That's not my home base. That's not my sweet spot. In fact, the guy who's probably best at that stuff, who I know pretty well, really, is Pat Hanlon, who wrote the book Primal Branding. Great book. One of the best books on branding I've ever read. But he's like totally into the positioning and soft art of marketing, and I'm totally into the math side of things. And I think, just like I was born and raised in Brooklyn, but now I don't live in Brooklyn. I think I'm kind of from marketing research, but I don't live in marketing research anymore. I live much more in, digital marketing and media strategies, data science. Basically I work with data scientists where I'll develop the math structures, and but I kind of suck at Python. So, they'll access the gigantic databases and code stuff up in Python. But usually I'm kind of like directing what the equational structure is of the approach. Yeah. So
there's three topics that, at least on the marketing side of it, that I was hoping that we could cover. And I know already that we're not going to do them full justice at all. But I think even giving folks a top line kind of awareness and kind of a brief overview of how you think about these things, and again, what you've learned on these different topics, will be extremely instructive for people. And we'll want them to understand, well, how do these apply then to our business, and how can we grow our business? So the first one is on what you call the movable middle. Can you explain, first of all, what the movable middle is and why it matters?
Yeah. So one way of segmenting consumers is in terms of their probability of choosing your brand, given that they're going to make a category purchase. And so it's not a heaviness of buying or heaviness of use consideration. It's a probability or a preference or a loyalty consideration. So if you think of consumers that way, aligned from 0 probability all the way up to 100%, that curve is not like a normal distribution like we normally think of in marketing research. It's not a bell curve. It's a really more of a U curve or an L curve, where the mode is 0. Most people don't have no probability, a significant probability of buying your brand. Okay, so what we did was we said, gee, can we chop up that curve in a way that would be productive for targeting when it comes to media strategies? So the movable middle is a middle segment that for a typical brand might be 15% of category buyers, but it's people who have between a 20 and an 80% probability of buying your brand. But because the curve is U-shaped, it's only about 15% or so of category buyers, but they're the most important category buyers to you in terms of media strategy because they're hyper responsive to your advertising. And it's math. It has nothing to do with creative. I mean, however good your creative is, the math will multiply. I like to say math multiplies message. So if you have average creative, you'll still be 5 times better if you target the movable middle than average. If you have great creative, you'll be 5 times great. So the math always multiplies the message. Now, you want to know how we got to this idea of movable middle, or you want
because I want to know how we know they're in the 20 to 80%. How do we know that they've got that probability of potentially buying the brand?
So there's 2 elements to your question. One is why 20 to 80, and the other element is how do you really operationalize it at scale in a digital marketing or addressable marketing world. It's not just digital; it's anything addressable. It's even more than just addressable. But anyway, so let's just take the simplest case imaginable would be either frequent shopper data or location data, if you're thinking about QSR, for example. So, but let's stay with frequent shopper data because they're very similar data sets. So what you have is the shoppers at scale whose purchases you are accumulating longitudinally. So it's the same shopper IDs over time, right? So what you can do is you can look over 12 months of data of history of somebody's brand preferences and think in terms of a brand of interest. So you're the brand manager of brand X, So what I care about is for every one of those shoppers, what is their share of requirements or share of wallet of the category towards my brand? And all you're doing is you're calculating what that percentage is, kind of like a share on an individual basis. So as I said, the great majority, it'll be 0. Some it'll be in that first decile of not 0, but less than 10, and so on. So that's one way to identify it at scale. I can go into others, but let's just stay with that for a minute. So what happened was we wanted to see if there was some kind of inherent connection between a probability of purchase and advertising responsiveness. And the reason we were really interested in that is I kind of come from a loyalty theory way of thinking about things, in part because when I was the head of analytics at Unilever in the US, they were very much into Hendry theory.
Yep.
Hendry theory is all about loyalty. Everything is derived from loyalty distributions, loyalty factors, stuff like that. But of course, Ehrenberg Bass dismisses loyalty and is much more into penetration. And certainly penetration is highly correlated with market share. But you know what? Eating ice cream is highly correlated with hot, sunny days. The question is, if you eat ice cream, does it become hot and sunny, or is it the other way around, right?
Mhm.
So anyway, so we got very interested in whether or not advertising responsiveness is actually driven in some way by probability of purchase. So working with the MMA and Newstar and fueled by numerator data, Jared Schreiber was very gracious at giving me like huge amounts of data across 7 categories. What happened was working with Newstar, we built an agent-based model. And when you build an agent-based model, you have to impregnate each one of the digital consumers with rules that make sense, right? So it kind of forced us to get deeper into the math. And as we got deeper into the math, we started to see, hey, it's the people in the middle who are responding to the same tranche of media in a much greater way than people who are in that low group. Well, the low group is what a penetration reachist will focus on, but they're not interested in your brand. To them, you're the gorilla in that video of kids bouncing basketballs and no one sees the gorilla.
Mhm.
So what the reason for it mathematically turns out is the workhorse of individual level modeling, of conversion modeling, is a logistic function, like a log odds ratio model.
Of course.
And it turns out you can actually take the first derivative of that function. And if you take the first derivative, the change in the probability of purchase with respect to that whole exponent, which you can call U or utility, if you just take the first derivative, you'll see it's maximized at P times 1 minus P, which means when that's the derivative, but it's maximized when P is equal to 0.5. So it turns out the first derivative, which is a rate of change, is not the same at every point along the curve.
Hmm.
It's very different. It's very flat, meaning very little change when people have like a 0, 1%, 5% probability of buying your brand. If they have a 90% probability of buying your brand, it's flat again. It's actually symmetric, by the way. But in the middle of the curve, around 0.5, that's where the rate of change is maximized. But so what I did with the movable middle is I said, well, it can't just target people who have exactly a 50% probability of purchase of your brand, choosing your brand. So let's broaden it out. So we broadened it out in a way that was kind of a good balance between a differential level of hyper responsiveness versus people who weren't in the segment, and having enough scale that it would be interesting to a media agency to build an audience around it and target that audience. So that was
okay. So from let's just get out of the math for a second and just back into the results.
No,
if I adopted this methodology,
yeah,
and took my media spend and identified, and maybe this is a good opportunity real quick to do the difference between segments and audiences.
Yeah.
But I can identify an audience that over indexes with the movable middle. What improved return on ad spend might I expect to see?
Yeah, so the starting point is, if you could target a segment, just that segment, how different would their level of response be to your advertising? So from actual case studies, we're seeing anywhere between 2 and 19x, not percent, x. So we actually, the most recent case study at the MMA, and I've kind of designed the research, but the most recent project being done with MMA, we're seeing 19x. The movable middle is 19 times more response. So in other words, think of it this way: if you're getting $1 back in sales for every $1 of ad expenditure, the movable middle is delivering $19 in sales. I mean, it's that
I think that the CFO is your best friend at every client company.
Yeah, especially in a recession, they should be. Yeah.
Okay, so just to pay homage to a user that's got a question, or a listener, I don't even understand the question. You can use reported constant sum if you don't have shopper data, right?
Yes, that is one of the things we do. We in a brand tracker or a brand equity study, it's a good question. Thanks for that. In a brand equity or tracker study, which is kind of the same thing, except it's done over time, use a constant sum question. which is basically asking somebody to divvy up 10 points based on how likely they are to choose one brand versus another in their consideration set. And, you use a little bit of a warm up, like you can give, if there's only one brand you'd buy, give it all 10 points. If there's a brand you would never buy, give it 0. You can give brands anything in between as long as it adds to 10, right? Well, it turns out that question works incredibly well at retrieving the actual probability of choice of that respondent. And I know that's for a fact for a few reasons. One is I used that question when I was at NPD and we built Brand Builder, which was our brand equity brand tracker tool. And we did a few Brand Builder studies to the IRI shopper panel. So we knew their share of requirements from recorded data, and we estimated from the constant sum and the correlation at an individual level was over 90%. So the question works really well. So what you do with that is, let's say you have 1,000 movable middles that you've accumulated over the course of tracking. If you do the tracker with a company, with a survey company that's onboarded, so that you can only use respondents who have, let's say, an Experian or a LiveRamp ID. And then what you do is you upload the movable middle, the people who give between 2 and 8 points to your brand, upload that via Experian or LiveRamp and match it, do a crosswalk to the backbone that the media agency is using. And that's how you can build a lookalike audience. And then you can have an audience of, say you go from an audience of 1,000 to an audience of, 30 million or something like that.
You're using a seed set to create the lookalikes?
Exactly, right.
Okay,
right.
So super quick, and I feel like I'm remembering something, and if I'm getting it wrong, we can move on. How can we use this movable middle to increase new product launch success?
Yeah, so the concept applies. So I talk about it in terms of CPG only because it's for an existing brand. It's the data are all there, so it's very concrete to think about how you would make this work. But for new brands, it's really the same idea that there are people who have no interest at all in the kind of new product that you are, and there are people whose needs and interests and degree of switching around that they currently do are such that they would be scored to be potentially hyper responsive to a new product offering that's of the kind that you're introducing. So if you identify these high propensity triers, again, through the exact same kind of process, basically, survey data, uploaded, lookalike modeling done off of that. If you identify these high propensity triers, and target media to them, you should wind up with more trial per $1 million in launch budget. In fact, I did work on one study where we showed that the level of trial among who we called high propensity triers was 2.2 times what it was of consumers who were not high propensity triers. So yeah, the logic applies to new brands. It applies to non-CPG.
Mm-hmm.
I've applied the same trick with constant sum data to financial services, to automobiles. I mean, it's really a pretty universal approach.
Well, you'd think that it would be, right? Because I'm still the same consumer. I'm just maybe in a different category, but it's the same mindset, might be between a 2 and an 8 on whatever your brand is in that category, right?
Yeah. The thing is, like a behavioral economist would look at this and they'd say non-compensatory decision-making, which basically is a fancy term for I don't consider all the stuff that's on the shelf. I kind of zero in on a few things that are familiar to me or of interest to me, and I don't look at the other stuff. So, I forget. I'm sorry, I forgot what the question was. How I got
No. Just at the.
What did you ask me? Tell me what you asked me.
No, but the logic of if I'm giving you between a 2 and an 8 brand consideration when I'm going to make a category purchase, it doesn't matter if I'm talking credit cards or basketball.
Right, exactly. So what it is, so what I meant to say before was that everyone reduces their choice set so that their ears don't bleed. And it exists no matter what the category is. You could be talking about smartphones. You could be talking about, what show you're going to watch on TV. It could be any of those things. People reduce their choice set so that they don't get overwhelmed by the choice task. There was one behavioral economist who said the brain is a lazy piece of meat. The brain uses a tremendous amount of energy, so people try and simplify their tasks, and that's why the people who never buy you are very unlikely to consider you. There's a behavioral economics interpretation for this phenomenon, but as I pointed out, there's also a mathematical interpretation, which comes right from calculus, basically.
Well, and the beauty of it is not only is it observable, it's actionable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and go back to, I didn't completely answer a question you asked before. So in the world of addressable media or media in general, targeting is not perfect. And that goes to the difference between a segment and an audience. You could say, I want to address media to the movable middle, but if 15% of consumers are in the movable middle, if you found an audience or created an audience that had 30 or 40%, that would be really good in terms of practical, addressable marketing. But 30 or 40% means 60 to 70% misclassification. So you can't, you can't deliver media to a segment, you deliver it to an audience. The segment is what you're looking for, and it directs you to be choiceful about which audience to go after. And then you direct your advertising to those, highly productive audiences based on the concentration of movable middle. But when you combine those things together, you should be able to improve your ROAS, return on ad spend, by 50 to 100%. So you're not going to get the 5X, but it's going to average out to 50 to 100% improvement, presumably. I mean, that's what I've seen so far.
And to your point, in a recession, when every dollar is being scrutinized, hey, this really matters. So
I mean, here's the thing, Bob. People think of advertising as a cost of doing business.
Right.
And that's the reason why it's one of the first things that gets cut in a recession, because they look at it as a cost. And as Larry Light, one of the most brilliant marketers in the business, once said to me, if people think of advertising as an expense, it will get managed down over time. If they think of it as an investment, it will get managed up. So my contention is that with smart targeting, you can actually make advertising a profit-generating activity. Now, in a recession, you'd be dumb to kill something that's actually returning profit to you. You cut costs, you don't cut things that are generating profit. If you target appropriately using the movable middle theory, advertising becomes a profit generator. It becomes self-funding, leading to higher budgets because you're making money. And eventually, as you hit a saturation point where you're kind of at what that ROAS cutoff level is, you stop, investing in in advertising at that point incrementally. But you're going to wind up at a much higher advertising budget, and the exact calculation ROAS means you're going to wind up with much higher sales growth. So it's really a paradigm shift in how to think about advertising, but all the evidence and the math points in that direction.
So here's Jeff Goldstein. Jeff's the president of AccuPoll and a tremendous marketer in his own
I know
right.
Jeff.
Okay, cool. So his question here is, I'm curious if you use a survey to identify the movable middle and lookalike modeling to drive targeted marketing at scale, Do you, Joel, have any data on how accurate that is in reaching the desired movable middle? Maybe that's a little bit what you're talking about with the audience.
Yeah, I mean, we've done a fair amount of work with Newstar. Not that it's limited. It's certainly not limited to working with Newstar. You can do this with any kind of ad tech partners. But one thing I do like about Newstar is they have a preset segmentation of, I think, 172 segments that they call their Element 1 or E1 segmentation. And the thing is, it's a pre-built segmentation or set of audiences that can all be activated because they have IDs behind all of that are all connected to, being able to push those audiences to publisher partners. Okay. Looking at the movable middle concentration levels across the 172 segments, and then you say create a top quartile in terms of concentration of movable middle, you should find that the top quartile is delivering 2 to 3 times, at least 2 times the concentration level of the movable middle versus the national average. Then that becomes the segment or the audience that you would want to, direct advertising to. Now, that idea of audiences and segments becomes universal for media planning because that concept works even for like linear TV or shopper marketing. For example, if you have an upscale product, I'm going to Florida in a couple of weeks, right? So if you have an upscale product, you want to concentrate your efforts more on Publix than Winn-Dixie, right? Yeah. So, the concept of I'm looking for a segment, what audiences exist naturally that I can find those segments I'm looking for. It's not restricted to look, fancy data science lookalike modeling and and addressable marketing. It includes linear TV. The only thing is you want to be smart about it and probably onboard the movable middle segment to smart TV data so you can actually see, the cable viewing patterns versus broadcast time, day part, program, scripted versus, non-scripted content. I mean, all that stuff. Do that. Find the right audiences, and basically you're improving your odds. That's really what you're doing.
And okay, so this is probably a good opportunity to pivot into a particular media channel, I guess we would call it, with retail media networks.
Okay.
And we're seeing so much shift, move into this, and I guess Amazon led the way on this. And I feel like I read a statistic over the past week or so. I won't get the number right, but just how Facebook and Google are down and Amazon is up, and then retail media networks as a whole are really kind of supplanting the dominance. They've created a third really heavyweight competitor to money that's just been naturally falling to those two guys. Can you talk a little bit about, for people that may not have a working definition of retail media, and then why it's more than just paid search on Amazon?
Yeah. So what Amazon, Walmart, and other Kroger, other retailers are doing, I think there's a dozen or more now, they are taking the shopping patterns that they see via first-party data, and they're turning them into audiences that are of interest, and again, tilt the odds in your favor, that they be of interest to marketers. So these audiences can be activated not just on the owned and operated properties of the retailers, because these retailers have built out networks now. So they can push audiences. You can, through, I assume operationally, there's a UI and you build the audience, and then you activate it and manage it through your ad manager with them. But you can push an audience, like presumably Amazon would have an audience of, high-tech buyers or something like that, or high-tech shoppers. You could push that out into, inventory across thousands of publishers now. Amazon offers that, and they have their own DSP where they would, serve that advertising. They'd make those choices and the advertising would be served. So that's where the different Target is another one, by the way, who's moved into the space pretty significantly. So it's not just search on the retailer site, although that is very powerful because search on a retailer site does lead to product page views. And what I found from working with digital data through my work with Disco is that one of probably the leading activity in terms of a conditional probability of an add to cart event is that they view your product page. So you better make your product page really, really good. In fact, it's more important for a marketer to make their product page good, product marketer, to make their product page good than it is their own vanity brand.com site. In general, that's the case, unless they sell on their own site. Corollary to that is you might want to consider driving traffic from Google paid search to your product page inside of Amazon or Walmart rather than your brand.com site.
Because tell me more about that's an interesting concept. Why would I do that?
Well, it's all based on the conditional probability. You want a sale, right? So it's looking at the conditional probability of somebody adding your product to their shopping cart, given that they engaged in a certain digital behavior. The conditional probability from a product page view inside of Amazon or Walmart to an add to cart event is much, much higher than from your own brand.com site, unless you sell your product on your own site.
Now, would the argument from the product manager be, yeah, but now they've got choices, at least if they're on my site and I can fulfill via my site, that gosh, why do I want to show them all the other options out there versus just captive on my site?
There's two answers to that. One is by doing that, you actually have a pretty high probability of hijacking someone's interest in another brand. Their journey could have started with an interest in another brand. So by really making your brand presence very strong inside of retail sites, and doing everything you can to curate the journey to an add to cart event, you'll come out ahead. Secondly, it goes back to that behavioral economics thing of, people are going to restrict the choices that they ingest into their shopper brain. They're going to, restrict those choices. So it's unlikely you're the only brand they have in their mind. So you're probably fighting for every purchase. So put up a good fight.
So if you were sitting down with the CMO of a CPG company and they're trying to allocate their marketing spend, and I generally don't know, category brand specific may really matter, but how would you be counseling them to allocate dollars towards retail media versus paid search or Facebook?
So what I would do first of all is, for me, the movable middle is an overarching concept. I'd be looking for the movable middle wherever I could find it. So if I find, if I can build an audience and push it for activation via addressable media programmatic, I'm going to do that. If I can find them on that they watch certain TV shows, I'm going to do that. If they are, if they align to audiences that retailers have, I'm going to do that. In fact, inside of, with Google, you can also upload an audience even for paid search. You can differentially bid. So, I would just try and the multiplier effect is so strong that I would always try that. And I think you'll find that the reach among that universe that you currently achieve is not that high if you're using a broad reach kind of mentality. Because, as I said, 80 or 90% of category buyers are probably not in the movable middle. So they're attracting 80 to 90% of your ad impressions if you're just planning your media based on broad demographics, which means largely 80 to 90% of your ad impressions are wasted. So, I would say, like, think of it as every media channel and media partner is like a person sitting around a table, and you'd say to them, we believe in the movable middle. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? I would just like optimize my strategy with respect to that across every possible way of activating it. And the other thing I would do, by the way, is maybe not so. This is not so much a CPG thing, but like for other marketers, QSR or wherever you have first-party data. Financial institutions, mobile service providers. This is like a lot of places where there's a first party relationship. I speak to a lot of CMOs, marketing leaders, especially in my role with the MMA. And I can tell you a number of them are so focused on reach that they actually put their own customers on a suppression list. That means that if an ID shows up for a known customer, you will not serve them advertising programmatically or via direct buy with a given partner. You'll put them on a suppression list so you don't quote unquote waste advertising. Well, hello, they're actually like 10 to 20 times more responsive to your media than non-customers. So one thing I would do, and there's hard evidence for this, by the way, through the work that I've done. But one thing I would do is, rather than put my customers on a suppression list, I would push that list and I would deliver 2 to 3 times what would be proportionate media weight to my own customers or my own first party list. And then what's left over, there'll still be a significant amount left over. I would look to those IDs not in my first party list, and I'd make sure as much as I could that they're in the movable middle. If you go through kind of like a waterfall of productivity, it's kind of like a marginal utility analysis, you have to wind up 50 to 100% better off, which can be the difference between advertising as an expense and advertising as a profit generator.
Wow.
So that's how I would advise, marketing.
So actually, can you give Jeff a super quick answer on, where he says that, Jared's book, Breakout Brands, and we're going to have Jared on in a couple of weeks, which I'm really excited about. I know that you guys collaborated a lot on that book, but, Jared's got this emphasis.
Well, I just, when you say collaborated, basically, Jared and I were interacting through the fact that he shared data with us when I was with the MMA project. And as a byproduct of that, he did ask me to write the technical appendix on loyalty analysis. But other than that, it's not like I collaborated throughout.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But he definitely gives,
it's Jared's work.
Shout outs on that. Jared's amazing. So, but the question here is around the emphasis of most growth comes from heavier category buyers, which of course, is completely in contrast with Byron Sharp and, the long tail. Mm-hmm. Does the movable middle skew more towards light or heavy buyers?
It skews a little bit more towards heavy buyers.
Okay. Which would double down on your thing of why I don't want to suppress my existing buyers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a probability thing. And it's also, you're trying to extract, if you think of the return on advertising or return on marketing in the context of a customer lifetime value calculation, which is a little different than the trial and repeat way that a basis would encourage you to think. But if you think about it in a CLV kind of way, usually you think of it as cost to acquire profit stream while someone is a customer, and probability you retain them as a customer. Okay. In the agent-based modeling work that we did with Newstar, it turned out, and we actually at first, I thought an error was made that it worked out this way, and we dug into it and we found the mathematical underpinning for it. It's not an error. What we found was that if you target the movable middle, you actually wind up with a greater profit stream per customer, a higher retention rate of your customers, and a higher penetration level. Even though you're actually reducing reach, you wind up with greater brand penetration, all by targeting the movable middle. And part of the reason for that is, again, targeting is not perfect. You're kind of making the misclassification work for you, but it's a form of lookalike modeling that, you know, if the brand that you're offering is index is really high for, you know, live sports, there's still a lot of people who are watching live sports, the buy that you make, who are not the exact customers that, you know, you're targeting, right? But they're lookalikes for them because their interest is similar. So every audience that offers misclassification, it's also a form of lookalike modeling. But anyway, we found that you actually wind up with greater penetration. Now, another reason for it is penetration is kind of a complicated equation. People think, well, penetration means I'm bringing in more non-customers and making them customers. That's only part of it. Part of it is retaining your existing customers. Part of it is in the actual mechanics of the calculation. It's having your customers show up as having made a purchase within a definitive time period. So there's a purchase frequency aspect. So when I'm generating incremental purchases by advertising to my own consumers, my own customers, that increases the probability that they show up as a buyer at least once in a defined time period. So it turns out that actually when you target the movable middle, there are these unexpected but mathematically justified reasons why you actually get all of these benefits at the same time.
Knock-on benefits. So I want to be mindful of the time, and it reminds me of you're talking about, like, you know, buy rate or penetration and purchase frequency, which is consecutive occasion purchasing. Can you talk about why that is such an important measure and what you've learned about that?
Sure. So the most important metric of brand growth is your Markoff repeat rate, which is the percent of people who buy you on 2 consecutive purchases. And it's something that at Lever Brothers we used to look at all the time, but it's become a little bit of a lost art. In fact, I think you could probably get it from an IRI or Nielsen, but they'd have to maybe run a special report or use a reporting model that they don't use that often. I wish they used it all the time, because the repeat rate in the matrix, like, think of a switching matrix literally as a matrix, and think of it in terms of linear algebra and all this great stuff you can do with linear algebra applied to a matrix. Okay. The diagonal term in the matrix, where all your brands down the side are what they bought on the first occasion of the pair, and all the brands, same brands across the top, are what they bought on the second purchase occasion in the pair. Okay. The diagonal terms are your repeat rates. The off diagonal terms are the probability that your customers are switching to a specific other brand versus the probability that other brand's customers are switching to you. Contained in that matrix is change, and it's retention of customers. And there's actually a linear algebra thing that you can do, which is, I know this will scare some people, but you can do an eigenvector, eigenvalue decomposition of any matrix, any square matrix. Well, the switching matrix is a square matrix. When you do the eigenvalue decomposition, you're going to find there's one eigenvector equal to 1. I mean, one eigenvalue equal to 1. That's the magic eigenvalue, because what it means is that that eigenvector associated with that eigenvalue is the steady state share distribution across all the brands in the category. That is the only vector that would tell you what the steady state is the one that's associated with an eigenvalue of 1. So what that means is the switching matrix times the distribution of market shares. If that's the eigenvector associated with an eigenvalue of 1, you get that exact same vector back, which means the shares at time t are exactly the same as the shares at t plus 1, exactly the same as the shares at t plus 2, and so on. Now, what if your market share, that's equilibrium, but very few markets are exactly at equilibrium. Your share might be a little below, what that equilibrium share is for you. Well, that means you're poised for growth. Your share could be higher. That means you're poised for decline. The main determinant of whether you're poised for growth or poised for decline is the repeat rate. It's just mathematically, it works out. The diagonal term is the main determinant of what the equilibrium share is. So linear algebra really points you to that diagonal, points you to the repeat rate, because what else could be more important than knowing what your share is today versus what your share is destined to be after a few cycles? If it's a much lower share that's destined to be, you better take corrective action, So it's all built into linear algebra, really, and it clearly points to repeat rate being the most important thing that you need to measure. Now, once you start thinking that way, it means you're going to do stuff differently. That's what's really important about it, is that you do not engage in the same activities once you start focusing on repeat rate. That's what brings in all the targeting stuff. Now, these two sets of findings that I've been discussing about the movable middle and the repeat rate develop completely separately from different initiatives. They just tie together mathematically exactly well. And there's literally an equation relationship across these two bodies of work. So that's what I'm working on right now, as a paper that I'm going to submit for peer review.
I'm sorry. So all of this would be predicated on access to longitudinal data. Is that right?
Well, it's predicated on it. It's longitudinal data makes that matrix very measurable. Mm-hmm. But when I was at Unilever, we used to put questions in our tracking survey. We used to say things like, we had questions like, what did you buy last time? What did you buy the time before? So you actually can measure this stuff from survey questions also.
Yeah.
Now, are they as good as frequent shopper data or location data if you're in a retail kind of a business? I think there's pluses and minuses. No shopper database covers every retailer. So in a way, a survey is more comprehensive. On the other hand,
when I was a numerator, we would talk about, I think 8451 is amazing within the four walls of Kroger. Yeah, but it's a Hubble telescope outside. It's I don't know what's out there.
Yeah. So I think you have to look for convergent truth. I think the shopper data that you would look at is highly accurate in a recording sense, but it's not completely comprehensive. The survey data is completely comprehensive, but it's not as accurate because it's based on recall and, people kind of working through in their mind how to answer the question. But there's value to both approaches, and there's always value to convergent validity.
Well, and then the other thing that's a little bit of a takeaway for me is what you were talking about with audiences. They're not perfect, and that's okay. And what you just said with these two different data sources, they're not perfect, and we know the pluses and the minuses, and that's okay. It's just understanding the limitations and the strengths, and then how do you apply those? Super quick. I do want to just sort of shift over to some career stuff because we are a career club. My experience with a lot of my insights and analytics clients is that they struggled to get in front of senior leadership, or it seems like forever the thing has been a seat at the table, air quote. What's your best advice to help people that are doing this real work and are finding these insights and want to kind of ring the bell at their company, like, hey, I think I found something? What's your advice to them?
Know your audience. So the way I'm talking on this interview, this discussion we're having, when I'm not going to talk to CMOs, except one maybe I have in mind who came from an analytics role, but I'm not going to talk to them about eigenvalues and eigenvectors and stuff like that. I'm discussing it here only because, I know this is a little more technical audience that you attract. You have to make the topic, the idea that you're bringing to someone who might be non-technical, you have to make it compelling, understandable. It's got to be an idea that they can be made to be comfortable with. It makes sense. It's a narrative that makes sense, and where the results are going to be there. So, think of the audience. If I'm talking to a data science team, I'm going to talk all about linear algebra and how you go from a Markov matrix to a beta distribution is an equation that makes that connection. Yeah, because that's what we're building. We're building an engine, right?
Yeah.
But if I'm talking to a CMO, I'm not going to talk about that stuff. I'm going to talk about it in terms of, payoff and doing things differently and how you wind up better and why this all works, that kind of stuff.
So simple, tell a story, have results.
Yeah. And make it enjoyable. Oof. Make it energizing, by the way. So about enjoyable, people don't want to struggle with a conversation. They have to enjoy the ride, so you have to make it enjoyable. Energizing. One of my best conversations I'll never forget was I was trying to evangelize the idea of shopper marketing when I was at Synovate and shopper insight services. And I spoke with this guy who was like the head of one of the large regions in the world for Synovate. Turned out he had a trade marketing shopper background. So we were right in the middle of budgets and everything. And I remember saying to him after talking about this stuff for half an hour, I said, Peter, I know you're in the middle of budgets. I'm sorry that I'm, taking so much time on this. And he said, are you kidding me? He said, conversations like this don't take energy. They give me energy. Mm-hmm. So just keep that in mind. You want to make that conversation with that particular person in the role that they're in and their mindset. You want to make it an energizing conversation.
Well, this has been both enjoyable and energizing.
There you go.
Eigenvalues notwithstanding, Joel, you just delivered in spades as always. Thanks, there's a whole other topic I'd love to go into with you, but time doesn't permit. But for anybody who's listening to this, I cannot recommend enough that you go to Joel's blog, his website. So if we could flash that up. So blog.joelrubinson.net. I assume they can also email you or contact you from that page.
My email's in there.
Yeah. But for anybody who's listening, that is just a free textbook on everything that we've been talking about. And if you're a brand that, I always like to say, Joel, if you're number one, the problem is everybody's gunning for you. And if you're not number one, the problem is you're not number one. So I think everybody would benefit from engaging with you, particularly again, as share is a little bit harder to fight for. People are taking a lot of pricing actions and promotion, which actually is counterproductive in so many ways. But I want to say that this has truly been enjoyable and energizing. And I thank you so much for your time.
Thanks a lot, Bob. I really
Awesome.
enjoyed it myself.
Okay.
Gave me energy too.
Come on, see? So thank you, everybody. Go Yankees. Hope you have a good time in Florida, and we'll see you soon.
Great. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Take care.
I know you're gone.